Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
It didn't work.
So, it's time for me to do a review of the new Steven Wilson record. I'm a little bit buzzed and opinionated, so let's go. So, Steven Wilson, The Future Bites. I mean, does the future ever bite? The present bites. I mean, wow. What a statement. This is a bit of a controversial record because it shows Steven Wilson going in a direction that most of his fans, who are fans of him for his solo work, never really saw him going in. And yet, as it stands, his solo work really isn't the full story when it comes to Steven Wilson as an artist. I mean, Steven has done so many things, from bits like No Man, Bass Communion, The Incredible Expanding Mindfuck. I mean, this is someone who's done a lot of different things. The very psychedelic genesis of Porcupine Tree. This is an artist who has never sat in one spot long enough to really capitalize on it. You know, even when we start to get into the stuff that is highly revered from Steven Wilson, like his In Absentia through to the Incident material with Porcupine Tree, where it's very prog metal, The Raven That Refused to Sing, and Hand Cannot Erase, that's 2 albums worth of his solo material, where, really, I mean, I don't think anyone really gives a shit about Grace for Drowning or Insurgentes. I didn't. I really didn't care about those albums. I didn't really care about Steven Wilson's solo career until Raven That Refused to Sing, and that's the album that drew me into him. Up until that point, I was just like, I don't care for anything Steven Wilson that isn't Porcupine Tree. Well, you know, here I am being wrong. But that said, I still got into The Future Bites, and I still decided I'm going to give it the honest benefit of the doubt. So, of course, you know, this is something where it's a very electronic release from Steven Wilson. It's a little bit different in that regard, although, like I said, he's done electronic music and he's done pop before. You know, you listen back to albums from Porcupine Tree like Stupid Dream, and there's a definite, Light Bulb Sun, you know, there's a definite pop music element to it. Nobody's saying that Steven Wilson has never done pop before. As far as electronic music, he has gone into those sort of experimental realms. This is the first album that he's done where he's really sort of blended those dichotomies together into something a little bit more cohesive, a little bit more musically coherent of a product. Although I'll get into more about that later. So, I'm just going to go through the album now. We have the first sort of opening salvo of the tracks Unself and Self. I find Unself is way too short on its own. There is a longer version in some of the bonus material, and I haven't heard it yet. I haven't heard much of the bonus material that comes with this record, and I'll get into more of that later. But the 1 minute 5 seconds of Unself just feels way too short. It doesn't give you enough of an opportunity to really get into the track before all of a sudden it jarringly gets into the track Self. Now, Self is kind of the proper opening track of the record. It's the one where, okay, now we're getting into the meat of The Future Bites. And I'm going to say something here, like, When I heard that Richard Barbieri, former Porcupine Tree keyboardist, was on this track, I thought there was going to be that much more of a uproar about it. Nobody seems to really mention that Richard Barbieri is on this track. I don't know what precisely his role on the song is. I think he probably does that sort of sampled noise solo in the middle. But it's a funky track. I mean, it has all of the sort of funky single note guitar riffs that you kind of think of with this genre. A really, really killer bass line. There's really nothing to this track other than just groove and funk. And honestly, that's great. And then when you pair it with the visuals from the music video, which is one of the first music videos I think that's ever been in existence where proper deepfake technology was used. I mean, that's a sort of incredible feat in and of itself. And self. But it's just, it's a great dichotomy between this sort of funky but cynical groove with this very deep faked sort of video. And then when you consider the lyrical concept of it about how, you know, we've all kind of turned to regarding ourselves, but without really, you know, seeking outwards, without really looking beyond ourselves, it makes sense. And I really applaud Steven Wilson for sort of bringing this into the concept, because as I'll get into it, the concept of this album is probably one of the most cohesive and coherent concepts that Steven Wilson's come up with to date. The next track is King Ghost, and it's a little bit interesting in the fact that it's almost one of the most electronic pieces that Steven Wilson's done. There's no guitars, no real drumming on it. There's sort of an eerie effect on the vocals where Steven puts it through a shortwave radio, which is a really cool effect that he uses a couple times on this record. I'm really a fan of what he did there. And yet, it doesn't lose the essence of what makes a Steven Wilson ballad a Steven Wilson ballad. It's electronic. There's almost no guitar or real drums or real bass on it. And yet, it still sounds like something Steven Wilson would write. And I think that's very much a testament to his style and production. I mean, you've got a bit of that sort of cassette tape warbling effect going on, and that's something that comes up a lot on this record, is that sort of warbling wow and flutter effect that really makes a lot of the keyboard tracks stand out on this record. 12 Things I Forgot is a little bit more of a traditional sort of Steven Wilson guitar-based strumming track. And, I mean, when you look at the lyrics for it, it's very much an idea of, like, there's very much a nostalgia, this is a resistance to all of this modern society that's going on around us, you know. Kind of were things really better in the 80s? I mean, I think so because I was there. I lived through that, and I cared about that, and so I want to go back to that. But these 12 Things I Forgot, I mean, it really kind of goes along with that mindset of looking at the past through rose-colored glasses. Are we really sort of... Are these 12 things I forgot about the past really good, or are they bad? I don't know. And I really appreciate Steven Wilson's sort of touching on that scenario situation, as it were, in being that you don't know if the 12 things he forgot are really positive or negative, because there were a lot of negatives about the 80s, 70s, even early 90s as well, you know. A lot of racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, racism, whatever the deal, but there was something about the art in that day where it really did sort of, it bridged the gap between the past and the present. And I feel like that's a really good segue to go into the next track, which is Eminent Sleeves. Now, Eminent Sleeves, I've heard a lot of people sort of criticize it for this very funk-driven. My colleague Notes Review said it reminded him very much of something like Play That Funky Music, White Boy. For me personally, because I'm a musician, and I noticed that Nick Beggs, who, this is one of his 2 guest appearances on the record, plays the Chapman stick, which, unlike a bass guitar where you'll slap, pop, and finger, it's all tapping. And he plays the stick on this record, and it sounds very much like something from King Crimson's 80s era, from Discipline to Beat to 3 of a Perfect Pair. And even though this track has this very electric pop sort of element to it, there aren't really any electric elements to the track. I mean, you've got very organic drumming, Chapman stick bass playing, guitar, electric piano. There's even a string section from the London session orchestra on it. And this also sort of plays into the concept of the album where, you know, I don't really go into the lyrics very much in my sort of reviews of concept albums, but this is very much a sort of a where is the world going with terms of, like, online shopping, social media. It's very much a sort of modern technology is bad, is the devil kind of mentality, but there's also a bit of a sort of celebration of it in some respects, and I'll get into that more later as we get into some of the following tracks. Man of the People is sort of a track that I'm not personally really big on. It didn't really grip me like the other ones. There's a really good falsetto sort of vocal part. Lyrically, I feel like this is a little bit more political than some of the tracks on this record, where maybe he's talking from the perspective of a politician along the lines of, I know I'm going to get like a shitload of nasty comments for this, but Trump, or just anybody who's looking to sort of be seen as the man of the people without necessarily actually being that. You know, there is a certain, and it goes along with a lot of the concept of this record of how we see ourselves versus how society sees us. And, you know, someone like Donald Trump sees himself as the man of the people, the champion of democracy, the superlative of noun, and really he isn't. You know, he's a divisive figure, but it is sort of this is how we see ourselves. We see ourselves through this mirror of whatever we perceive ourselves to be, and that's a big aspect of this record through every track. I mean, with Self, it literally is the definition of that, is how we see ourselves. King, Ghost, and 12 Things Are Forgot have a lot to do with how we see ourselves in terms of relationships, what we are as people. Eminent Sleeves is more of a how we see ourselves in the context of the future in the worst case scenario. But to lead us to that worst case scenario, we have Personal Shopper. Now, this is the 10-minute long epic that I sort of consider to be the album's centerpiece. And this is sort of the driving force of both the music and the lyrics behind this record. In Personal Shopper, Steven talks about how we buy and buy whatever material goods, whether it be, alcoholic beverages or cassette tapes. Anything that makes us feel good on the inside. The idea that money can, in fact, buy happiness. And that it's sort of an embrace of that, but it's also sort of a look at the idea of what if, in the future, we have a company, say, like Amazon, that becomes such a monopoly on how we spend our money that everything we buy comes from them. And given the sort of pandemic-oriented view of a lot of current society, I've spent a lot of money on Amazon Prime, on eBay, on, merch stores from individual bands and such. It's hard not to listen to this album and listen to Personal Shopper and feel just a little bit personally attacked by it. Like, oh, I'm really contributing to this. I'm not buying local. I'm contributing to Jeff Bezos' pocketbook. Wow. And yet, it's not a completely denigrating view of capitalism and, mercantilism of purchasing from all of these sources. Don't get me wrong. I love buying stuff from eBay and Amazon. I bought my Walkman from Amazon, and it's a decent enough product, as I mentioned in a review past. But there's just something kind of funny about this idea of, capitalism is both the boon and bane of our current existence. And here we are trying to purchase things like self-esteem, self-control, self-love. And that's where the sort of Elton John cameo, where he's reciting all of these products, but also talking about, all of the consequences of these. That, buying sunglasses and limited edition box sets is more of a buying self-confidence and self-control aspect that really speaks to me about this track. I could talk about the lyrics for this track for ages. Never mind the fact that the music is frickin' killer. That Kraftwerky sort of bass riff, synth bass part that goes on through it, it's killer. I can't say anything bad about this track. It's exactly the kind of electronic music I would listen to if I were into that genre. If I really loved, and I love groups like Kraftwerk, and for me, this track is really that kind of, that's what I'm looking for in a modern electronic pop tune. Next, we follow up with Follower, and some of my colleagues have pointed this out to be one of the weaker tracks. Personally, I kind of like it on a musical level. On a lyrical level, it's very much in the vein of the rest of the album, where it's about, the very modern sort of societal views of the self. And we talk about how the internet has made everybody someone who is someone who is looking for followers. You know, like, subscribe, and download, and whatever in the link below. You know, that mentality. Seriously, though, like and subscribe. But yeah, I mean, it's that mentality, that follow me, love me, bask in my awesomeness on the internet mentality that really kind of is the lyrical theme of this. But for the musicality, I also really love where it has this sort of krautrock, motoric beat, that very persistent, you know, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare kind of thing going on. It's a very persistent beat that really, it draws you in as a listener. And then when the middle of the track comes in and it goes into this sort of, I don't want to call it instrumental because, you know, there's vocals through it, but there's some sort of organic sounding piano and keyboard riffs that go on through it, and some really excellent harmony vocals, and everything just sounds a little Trevor Horny. You know, this is like a little bit Yes from the Drama era, and I'm here for that. I love that album, and just to hear that on a Steven Wilson record, I'm a simple man. I hear something that sounds like Trevor Horn's songwriting, I'm in love. And there's a couple of little tiny details to Follower that really draw me personally in, like the fact that the guitar solo in the track is Steven Wilson playing an acoustic guitar through a Hughes and Kettner Tubemeister amp, which is what I use for my guitar amp. You know, it's a little bit, it kind of hits me right here in the fact that, like, oh, Steven Wilson uses the same gear and material that I use. But, I mean, I can be personal about that all day, but I just think this is a really strong track with a very persistent rhythm, a very catchy melody, and the fact that it kind of comes in with these really cool Trevor Horn-esque harmony vocals really speaks to me on sort of a fundamental level. And I really enjoy what he did on this track. Personally, I think this is the strongest track from the record, and the one that I keep coming back to time and time again to sort of listen to it and just bask in how glorious and awesome it is. I can't say the same about the final track, Count of Unease. It's 6 minutes of ambient noodling from Steven Wilson, and I really like a lot of the sort of ambient noodling that Steven Wilson does on his solo records, but part of it really appeals to me when it grows into something more. Like, when you listen to a track like Pariah off of To the Bone, it starts off with very much a soft acoustic strumming and a simple vocal melody, like Count of Unease does, but it eventually grows. Same with the title track from The Raven That Refused to Sing. It's a track that starts very simply and grows into something more as it progresses, but this track never grows. It sticks very close to the ambient keyboard riff and vocal melody dichotomy that's going on in the track without ever really branching out from it and becoming something bigger. It doesn't climax the record, it just kind of leads the record out on a bit of a whimper. And you know, if this were placed somewhere in the middle of the record, I might feel a little differently about it, but as an album closer, I'm almost kind of glad it closes the album because I could just skip the track. I don't need to listen to it, and the album's done. If the album ended on Follower, and I believe that Steven Wilson actually said that is how he intended to write the album in a recent listening party on Twitter, He mentioned that Follower was intended to be the final track on the record, and Count of Unease really doesn't add anything to it. It just kind of plods on for 6 minutes, and by the time it's done, you don't really feel like you've learned anything or picked up anything from this music. So, if I have to talk now about Steven Wilson's The Future Bites as a full experience, there are a couple of flaws that I can talk about. I think that the album flow is a little bit off. I mean, there's a couple of moments, like when it goes into 12 Things I've Forgotten and Eminent Sleeves, it feels a little jarring. Same with Unself into Self. There's moments where it really feels like no consideration was given to the flow of this record, but rather just, here are some individual songs that sound really good, let's put them together in whatever order I feel fit, and we'll see how it goes. Personally, I think a track like Personal Shopper or Follower should have been the ending song of the record, while Count of Unease should have been put somewhere maybe like in between 12 Things I've Forgotten and Eminent Sleeves. If I were the one sequencing the tracks for this record, that's how I would have done it. And I would have gone with the full version of Unself for the record. Because as it stands, this album is only 42 minutes long, which is a very short album for Steven Wilson standards. I mean, he's used to doing a lot of 10-minute long songs for, like a 60-minute long record. Like, a lot of his records are double albums on vinyl for that reason, whereas this one easily fits on a single vinyl. And, there is a problem with the flow of this record. But that being said, the individual tracks on this record and the way everything is sort of constructed, the way the individual tracks are built, I really dig what Steven Wilson's going for here. I really get that sort of, there were a lot of comments. I write for Ultimate Guitar, and a lot of the articles that have been coming out lately have pointed out Steven Wilson's sort of distaste for modern guitar-driven music. And as a guitar player, as someone who actively has an interest in picking up a guitar, playing it, and writing with it, I get exactly what he's talking about here. I've had a lot of creative drought picking up a guitar because all I want to do is just noodle the same old scales, chords, patterns that I always do. There really is something to breaking out of your mold by going with something a little bit different, like synthesizers, drum loops, and other factors to sort of bring that excitement back into your music. Bring something a little bit more original. And, funny enough, looking at the actual credits of this record, this is probably one of the most solo Steven Wilson solo albums to date, because he does pretty much everything on this record. Former bandmates Adam Holtzman on keyboards and Nick Beggs on bass and Chapman Stick only appear on 2 tracks. He has drummer Michael Spearman, who appears on most of the record, and some of the tracks he's only playing something like cymbals, while Steven Wilson's programming the rest of the beat for the track. Steven Wilson does pretty much everything else himself on this record. You have a cameo appearance from Richard Barbieri on Self, a cameo appearance from none other than Sir Elton John doing the spoken word in Personal Shopper. But beyond that, this is the most solo Steven Wilson record that Steven Wilson's ever produced. He performs most of this record and programs most of it himself. And I gotta give him props for that as well, because This is one of his first albums where he's really sort of broken free of that I need a full band mentality. And he did a lot of this himself. And, as someone who also, I personally do a lot of my own music myself, I really respect where Steven Wilson kind of went with this. So in conclusion, this is a really fantastic record from Steven Wilson, where it really shows what he's willing to do on his own now with the tools that he is willing to work with today. And even though this record is going to be very controversial to anyone who does not accept the idea of electronic music and will not accept loops and beats and synths all over a Steven Wilson record, I think that this record succeeds where perhaps an album like To the Bone, his other sort of pop exploration, didn't. To the Bone didn't really feel like he was committing to the pop aspect. He went with the pop songwriting aspect, but kept the instrumentation very in the Steven Wilson vein of things so as not to piss off his fan base. And it really felt like he was sort of, oh no, I'm not a pop artist, I'm a prog rock artist, I'm just a prog rock artist writing pop songs. Whereas the Future Bites is like, no, I'm writing electronic music, screw you, I'm gonna do this my way, and if you don't like it, go listen to Dream Theater, or whatever, I don't care. Don't listen to me. So, I gotta applaud Steven Wilson on his integrity and his artistic vision for this record. I really think Steven Wilson's done a great job with the Future Bites. If you can go check out some of the bonus material, because there's a B-sides collection that came out with it as well, that's also a really good place to sort of hear some other tracks that maybe didn't quite make the cut for this. Personally, I'm on board with Steven Wilson doing this, and knowing that Steven Wilson's the type of artist who never sits in one particular genre long enough to really stick with it and expand on it to the point where it becomes his identity. I know that perhaps with the next Steven Wilson release, you never know what you're gonna get. It might be doubling down more on the pop aspect, or it might be going into even more experimental territory. We don't know. The future can only hold so much on what's here for Steven Wilson's music, and I'm here for it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Love Show out.